Hello and welcome back. Welcome for those new to my channel. Welcome back for those returning to another weekly race update. We are on the time trial course again, Big Flat 8. This is the morning time trial. I'm riding with DW19 for the morning, which is a little bit more of a chill ride. Now, this is a latte team, but the mornings are generally for kind of warming up, getting things going, not working too hard. We still pushed it. And, you know, you can see I kind of went a little bit harder out the gate than I think everyone expected to. So once I realized that I was pushing a little bit hard, I eased up a bit. Because again, this being a morning run, you know, we do, you know, express and want to keep it chill. So just rolling on through, and then I'll jump forward to really where the action kicks up. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the end of this video because as I was riding, my sweat ended up basically hitting buttons on my phone, which ended up stopping my recording. And so I got a good portion of it, but again, this being a racing update, I'm not going to show the whole thing. Just want to touch on, you know, one thing as we jump forward here. And so as we get to the dirty Suppressa, you can see we're transitioning from the pavement to the gravel. And this is where having good communication and having a good, you know, well-run team comes in handy. And so we are, you know, talking about how we're going to handle this climb. And again, this being a, you know, even though we're a latte team, again, this being a morning, you know, 7 a.m. morning ride on the East Coast, we were just like, hey, let's just, you know, pace it easy. Don't push too hard. And, you know, let's just stay together. And that's exactly what happens here. You know, we do our best, stay together and just really hold with each other and make sure that we're not, you know, dropping anybody, leaving anybody behind. You know, we do have one rider that's kind of off a couple seconds, but, you know, that is where, you know, the person on the front is always going to kind of modulate the pace. And, you know, I do my best to kind of fill in that, you know, if I'm pushing too hard, I will ease up and kind of stay in the gaps if possible. Or like in this case, I, you know, go off the front, but I go off the front to kind of slow down. And that's a tip I picked up from ladder racing, as a matter of fact, is, you know, sometimes you can go off the front, but if you go off the front, sometimes you can take that to your advantage and actually slow the pace down. So that way everybody kind of slows down as a whole. So just wanted to share that as I jump into the evening TTT race. Now, this being the evening race, I'm on DW9, which is the 30 watt electrons, and we are top 10 team for sure. Often top 3, top 5. Like we're, you know, we don't take it easy. We are complete opposite of the morning runs. And so being back on this course, I felt good. This being my second race of the day, you know, my legs felt good, felt prepared. You know, having done this course already, I kind of felt more prepared than I normally would on TTTs because at least I had familiarity with, you know, the route, the hills, the dips, the, you know, where things were going to slow down, where things were going to speed up. And so we are, you know, the squad that I'm on is, you know, absolutely strong. And so we have myself, Bob, Coffee Snob, Greg, Seth, Brian, and Dan. And so we're, you know, again, the emphasis with this team is, as you can see, all the flames coming out the gate. The emphasis is we're going to go as hard as we can. Now, one thing I didn't mention on the previous race, for the morning race, that I mentioned to the guys as we were racing on this race, is I actually got to race with someone who is on Eat Dirt 2 in the morning, which I was absolutely ecstatic about because that has been the team, as you guys know, and I've mentioned previously, that's a team that we always aim to beat because they are, you know, the number one team in latte division and, you know, absolutely incredible. When they race hard. They've got absolutely strong squad. their team is quite literally at the limits in terms of, staying within the category without getting promoted. And the only time we've beat them is when they got promoted temporarily. And so, you know, we so when I got a chance to race with one of their riders, I was like, man, I would love to see more of your guys' races in order to learn, because you guys are the strength that they carry as a team is absolutely fantastic. And he told me, he's like, look, we got a couple really light riders that are excellent for climbing, and we got a bunch of diesels essentially, for the flats, and so they've got a good mixture, good strong team, which obviously shows because you'll see at the end here, how where they ended up in terms of placement in comparison to us. But we were definitely aiming. So initially we were aiming for like 45, 46 kilometers an hour on the flats, somewhere in that vicinity. I know for the guys that run Imperial, I think they were aiming for like 28 miles an hour ish, somewhere around there. And so, you know, anytime I got off the front, I was going to push. I was pushing for, 4 to 4.5, somewhere around there, because I did not want to, I wanted to push as hard as I can, whenever I could. And so as you can see right now, we're pushing 47, 48 kilometers an hour and absolutely flying. So I'm going to jump forward, because again, this is, this being big flat 8, it's relatively flat. There's a couple hills here and there, but nothing that's going to slow us down so much that we need to worry. Now, coming into the last 2 kilometers here, we are still motoring on. We've got, 5 on our team left. We end up dropping a couple just because it happens. They're not far behind us, but, it happens. And that's, again, it's a sign of how hard we were pushing on this race. We wanted to hold on to as many people as possible, and that's always the aim for our team, is hold on to as many people as possible. But every now and then, if you don't feel good, you don't feel good, and it just happens. So as we, start to round this corner here, again, I'm off the front. I'm pushing as hard as I can, and it really does feel like I'm pushing as hard as I can. Doing 42, 43 kilometers an hour, and just feeling like my tank is quite literally running dry. You can see my heart rate in the 180s, and I'm barely pushing 3 watts per kilogram there as I get into the draft. And so this for us was just our final push. We had what we had in terms of who we were going to stay together. We wanted to make sure that we didn't want to drop anybody else. Obviously, crossing the line with 5 is not ideal, but at the end of the day, it's imperative that all of us make it across the line in case in case anything, because mechanicals happen. Even though we're in a virtual world, mechanicals happen all the time. And so, as you can see, we're starting to ramp up the pace. We know that we've got under a kilometer left, and we want to give it as much as we can for as long as we can. So we ended up pushing up to about 47 kilometers an hour as we start to round the corner just before the Fuego Flat sprint, and I push off the front. So our team leader's like, go. He's like, just go. And so this was basically what I had left in the tank. And so I start pushing and just really getting up there in terms of power. You see one of our guys start to come past, and everyone starts to push across. And so I get on the pedals with 400 meters to go and just really give everything that I had left in me. My heart rate being in the 180, mid 180s, start to push 6 watts per kilogram just to really get, drain everything out of me and just get, make sure I get across the line. Right now it's, myself and Greg are kind of in the, 4th-ish place position. And so we didn't want to leave, we didn't want either one of us to drop. And so we were both encouraging each other on the chat just to keep going. As you see, I crossed the line in 5th place at, 43:41. And ultimately that's, where our final time ends up being, 43:41. And so that puts us in 6th place overall, which is, for us, again, an excellent effort, considering I looked at the splits for our race as well as the Eat Dirt 2 riders. And we really matched split for split. We matched them almost identically. And really the top, the 3, 4, 5, and 6, we all basically did the same splits, almost one for one. It's the last, what would essentially be split 4, but it's that last, section of the race is really that made the biggest difference amongst all the teams. And either two ultimately ended up coming across the line 20 seconds ahead of us. And so, chapeau to them, chapeau to, to anyone that, obviously the top, the top placed teams, they're obviously fantastic racers, to be able to end up in those positions. But I think, we did a fantastic job considering, how the race went. We held on to as many people as we could for as long as we could, and ultimately just did a fantastic job crossing the line in 43-41. All right, moving on to the tiny races. This is on the turf and surf. Now, last week I ended up in 14th place for my pen, being the 510 to 700 pen, which is the B category pen. And so 14th place overall, which I was absolutely ecstatic about because it was an absolutely tough race. Now, this time around, it is not a mass start event. Now, I was completely confused by that initially. When I saw people leaving, I was like, what's going on? Because my plan was all based on mass start. I like the mass start format. I think it's a great format. I think it's, a format that suits me because as everybody gets going, I can basically nestle myself into a group that if I push myself hard enough, I can stay with, even if it means I'm, overreaching, I can still get pulled along into a stronger group, or end up, by default in the, in the group that power wise I am meant to be in. And so as we get rolling into the surf and turf or turf and surf course here, as you guys know, I've ridden this what feels like a million times. It's a course that, I've done all too often. Thankfully, we're not going up the Pain Cave. We're basically ending right where we get out of the city and start into the jungle, which is what I'm going to jump forward to now. And so as we get to the last kilometer here, you can see we are absolutely motoring on. Now, the hard part with the way this race was run, because of the staggered start times for the different categories, is the faster A category riders are basically pushing through the B category riders, and then we are pushing through some of the C category riders, and so on and so forth. So the finish line becomes harder to judge what place you're in. So I was doing my best to kind of keep an eye on the, on the chart to the right, but ultimately I just kind of stayed with the group that I was in and tried pushing as hard as I can. You can see I'm making my way to the front here with 500 meters to go. Now 400, just trying to position myself so that way I get enough draft in order to, get through the group as quickly as possible and get a good position on this final sprint. And so I start to push not as hard as I can go sprint wise, but push hard enough so that way I can, again, push through this group and ultimately, get a good placement here towards the end as I approach the finish line, kind of staying with this last little blob that's here and cross the line, ultimately cross the line in 10th place, which is and ends up being the best placement that I did the entire series, because boy, oh boy, did it get harder from here. So now in between race 1 and race 2, I only ended up having like 3.5 minutes, which is not a long time to recover. And so you can see my heart rate's in the 130s. And so we move over to the rooftop or railways and rooftops, which ultimately this course really, I knew this was going to be hard. I knew this was going to be one of the hardest ones, and really it being the second round made it probably the hardest because it ended on the rooftop KOM, and that really set us up for what the rest of the series was going to look like. Because yes, race 1 was hard, and we went out hard, we rode hard. I think I averaged in the mid 300s in terms of wattage for that entire race, but only having a few minutes, a few and a half minutes. Actually, that's properly said, because generally a few refers to 3. So only having a few and a half minutes was not enough time to really rest, was not enough time to recuperate my energy stores. And so as we hit this, you can see the group is absolutely stretched out as we make our way through the casino. And so once we, start to pull through here, I'm going to jump over to really where it matters most. So as we come into the rooftop, you can see I'm still attached with the main group for, main group that I rode with. But as you can see, they quickly start to pull away from me at the base of the climb, which makes absolute sense because the pen that I'm in, there's a lot of strong riders and a lot of light riders. And so that combination really makes for, a great race, but ultimately ends up causing me to struggle a lot because now this is where the wheat and the shaft get separated for sure. And so that's kind of what ends up happening as we start to make this climb. Yeah, I'm passing people here and there and I'm feeling good about it because I'm looking at it as I'm I know I'm pushing hard. I'm in the upper 200s, lower 300 watts when I'm, on the climb portion itself. And so I know I'm pushing as hard as I can and I know I'm doing good. But ultimately, the people the pen that I'm in and the group that I'm in, they are up the road. They are moving. They are doing great. There may be one or two people here and there that end up falling off, kind of like I did. But a lot of the people that I'm passing are from the C pen or D pen or E pen. And so you see the group that passes us or passes me just now. If you check out the channel Rough Draft Cycling, he has his main video on this. He ended up passing me on that part of the climb, and they were, man, you got to check out his video. They were flying. They were absolutely flying up this climb. And so really good video to watch. And so as I make my way up to the top here, I felt good. I really did feel good about where I ended up, how I did on this climb. It wasn't my absolute fastest up this climb, but at the end of the day, I still felt good about my performance here, considering, how hard this series initially started off. And so as I finish this climb, I jump over to the next race, which takes us to the fine and sandy route. And again, so as we kick this off, you can see we got about 30 seconds to go. Now I had a little bit more time between the second race and this one. Ended up having closer to 5 minutes. So a little bit more time to rest, a little bit more time to let my heart rate come down, get some fluids in me, and kind of get myself prepared and ready to go. But ultimately, now so race 3 generally tends to be the race where everybody starts to, you can see the pace come down a bit. You can see, power numbers start to diminish. Fatigue starts to set in. As you can see, I'm going out the hardest, which is an anomaly because I would not expect myself to be the one to, set the pace up front. But I'm going out with the same energy that I would normally go out on a race. And, ultimately, this is just kind of it's a warm up for me, or a warm up for everybody else, but it's, me going at, a strong enough pace where I felt like it was the right thing to do. But like I mentioned before, I'm going to jump forward to really where the action starts to kick off. And in the case of this course, that is this corkscrew climb. And as we start to make our way and start to approach it, you can see, we're doing relatively good power numbers. I'm in the low 200s, which is reasonably easy paced. Like, we really did not push very hard at all. But this climb, it being essentially in the middle of the, sort of, I guess, not quite in the middle of the race. It's, really still in the beginning. It is where, I knew this was going to be the separator amongst the group. And so I knew that I had to stay with this front group coming out of this climb. Because if I didn't stay with them coming out of this climb, I knew I was going to end up, getting dropped. And, once I got dropped, there's no way, with the speeds that this group is running, there's no way I would have been able to catch up with them and, perform well at all. And so I'm pushing as hard as I can, holding, in the, 4 watts per kilogram, 5 watts per kilogram. Now, I would love to be able to hold this for more than a minute or two, but ultimately that's where I'm at performance-wise. And so as we make our way to the top, I end up, still holding my pace pretty well. Again, I'm happy about how I was performing. Held my pace pretty well. Start to, bring down the pace a little bit as we start to reach the top, because you can see it is, even though Sauce is showing the group is 37, it's because everybody's kind of everywhere. We're just close enough to, for Sauce to consider us a group, but at the same time, the bodies are scattered, as they say. Now, as we hit this final kilometer, you can see the group is exceptionally stretched out, and I'm starting to, fall behind here and kind of get detached from that front group. And so I am, at this point, I know I've only got a little bit to give, so I'm doing my best not to surge, because it's, coming down to 700 meters to go. I know I've got enough to give a decent sprint towards the end. I've got my aero helmet still. And so as the group starts to pull away little by little, I'm focused on how many people can I push through when I do start my sprint. And I wanted to hold on to my sprint for as absolutely long as possible. But as I start to see more people light up their aero socks and use their power-ups, I start to push up the watts into a fairly decent sprint, 600-ish watts here, which does end up getting me a few places ahead as I start to push through a few more people here. And you can see, I end up kind of coming to halfway through the end of that sprint. My legs were absolutely on fire. And so I gave one last little surge towards the end just to kind of make up a few extra places, but ultimately crossed the line in 24th place, I believe, 23rd place. And so there you go. Now with this last race, I wanted to show the entirety of it, because there's no way to explain how this last one felt. Now, this being the microscopic Mercury theme, I've done this series before. And so I kind of knew what to expect, knew that this was going to be all uphill, and knew that it was going to be painful. But boy, oh boy, was this painful. You can see the group is already pulling away. Like, they are flying. Now, I'm on the SLA with the NV78 wheels, because the climb is fairly draftable. It's, reasonable enough to where I could justify, the NV78s. I didn't want, I could have gone with the lightweight wheels, but as you can see, there's enough yellow and light red mixed in there, that you can get a decent draft as you're climbing. It being on the gravel, though, that is where, Evil Steph, who's in the comments, and he's kind of like, he's my on-site coach. He's always in the comments, just kind of letting me know, hey, what to do, and just encouraging me, and really has helped me immensely. And so him, JD, and everybody, and people say you shouldn't start naming names, because you always inevitably end up leaving people out. But so many people have helped me become the racer that I am, in terms of in Zwift. And so he was like, hey, maybe you should consider the gravel bike, which I gotta say, like I mentioned to him in the chat, the only reason why I didn't choose the gravel bike was because I don't trust myself with the gravel bike. I don't ride it enough. I don't know how I perform in it. It's a heavier bike. I don't have any upgrades on it. And so at least my SL8, I've got the advantage of the upgrades. I've got the advantage of the, experience with it. So I know what it feels like. I know when I feel like I'm performing well, as you can see, as I'm, reaching the top here, with the NV78s, I'm still feeling good. About 10 minutes into the race, as I crossed the finish line, it ultimately crossed the finish line in 24th place. But as you saw, there were bodies everywhere. Like, this was an exceptionally hard race, exceptionally hard. And so maybe another time, if this series comes back up, maybe I'll try it with the gravel bike, since the new pack dynamic kind of give the gravel bikes a little bit more of an advantage. But again, I chose the bike that I felt like I could perform the best in, and that's how it went. Overall, I ended up in 21st place, and I gotta say, I'm happy with my performance. Even though I didn't do as good as I did last time, this was a completely different set of circumstances, a different series altogether. And like I mentioned before, check out Rough Draft Cycling's channel, his video on it. You can see, and like I mentioned to him in the comments, the fact that I saw him struggle gave me comfort in knowing that it really truly was a hard series. All right, so moving on to Cityscapes. This is stage 4 of the Cityscape series. We are in London, and at this point, I'm coming into this race in the mid 500s in terms of GC, so I'm feeling good overall. And know that, this is really the last opportunity I got. Now, one of the things I learned when it comes to these, with the ZRacing series, especially if you're going to go out for GC, you want to make sure you're not only in the same category, racing in this each week in the same category, but also making sure that you're racing with a fast group. Now, depending on your time zone, you may or may not have a big group that you can work with. One of the on the Zwift Racers Facebook group, someone had responded to a comment that I posted about that, because I mentioned, if you want to do good in GC, race with a strong, strong group, and they were like, strong fast group, and they're like, hey, the bigger the group, the faster you get. So that's also a good tip there. So if you can find a pen with more than, in my case, 12 people, then you can increase the overall speeds, because at the end of the day, when it comes to the GC, the completion time is really what matters. And so if you're racing with a group that's just going to do zone 2 the entire race, and you have GC ambitions, then you're going to have to race again. You're going to have to do it again, and find a time where you're going to race with people that are going to push you as hard as you can. And so that being said, I'm going to jump forward to really the difference maker on this course. And so as we start to come up to Fox Hill, we're still all together, but as you can see, the pace of the group really starts to push on. And that is where, this is where I knew I was going to struggle the most. This being the, the up to, I think, 700 category. I think it was like 510 to 725, something like that. I knew, they were going to go strong. They were going to go fast up this hill. And as you can see, I got dropped almost immediately. And so as even the rider in front of me starts to push forward, my focus here is just, I know what I can do in terms of my 20-minute power. I know I can, try and maximize that, that range, and really just focus on that. That is where, in my case, my opinion, when it comes to climbing, that's where you want to pace yourself at when these longer climbs, where you're going to be on the climb for 10 15 minutes, whatever the case may be. In my case, I think I was somewhere just under 10 minutes on this climb, and so we'll see that as we come up towards the top here. But I'm just trying to stay in that mid 3 watts per kilogram zone. I do end up using my feather because I was absolutely wrecked, man. Now you can see in the thumbnail, I'm wearing my indirect calorimetry mask, and I've got to say, racing with that thing on is absolutely brutal. It is brutal. It was tough. It's like trying to breathe through a snorkel tube, but racing at the same time. Like, imagine trying to get as much oxygen as possible through a snorkel tube. So that's kind of what it's like racing with that thing on. Now, it restricts your breathing enough so that way it can grab whatever it needs in terms of your breath to analyze it. As you can see, I do end up passing one person. Now, I jumped in front of him just to kind of give him a little bit of a draft. But as we come up over this hill, I was just like, all right, I'm ready to get finished with this race. Because at this point, I am doing my best to try and breathe as much as possible. Now, you do see that he actually ends up catching up to me and passing me as we get over the escalator climb. And so I'm looking at this as, hey, we've got 800 meters to go. So I am not steering to the left. My left paddle ended up getting stuck, pulling left. And so I've tried messing with it a little bit, but ultimately I wasn't able to get it to cooperate. And so you can see I'm basically what felt like grinding against the far left, wall there. And so as we, come up 600 meters, I knew I was going to sprint. I didn't know whether or not that rider was going to sprint. And so I was like, you know what, if I can at least come across the line in 7th place, then I'll feel better about how I did. Because I felt completely wrecked after that climb. And just, even though I know that I was in the race with much stronger riders, I also felt like I could have kept up with them, but ultimately didn't. And so as we, start to get closer with 300 meters to go, I launch my sprint. I don't see a counter response from that rider. So he obviously was just like, let this dude go. I don't know what he's doing. There's nothing to sprint for. But as I've heard before, and I think I've mentioned it before, at the end of the day, no matter where you cross the line, you push hard as you can because you want to at least be the best of the rest. And that's something that I picked up from JD as well as from Rob Zwifty Zwifter. And so as I crossed the line in 7th place, I knew that I gave absolutely everything I could, in spite of what the numbers show, because for some reason the numbers never reflect how I actually feel. But ultimately ended up crossing the line. I did finish the series in the mid 500s in terms of GC, which again, considering the last series, I ended up in the mid 600s. I felt good about, doing better this time around for this series. And now we jump to the next race. Now this is the racing series for July, the Allez, where we get the yellow fever, where everybody gets focused on the Tour de France. And so that is where Zwift has taken us into the world of France on the croissant course. And boy, oh boy, did I underestimate this route. And again, I will defer you to the Rough Draft Cycling channel for his version of it, because again, he is a monster racer. He's in the 700 to 1,000 category, and races some of the top racers in Zwift. And so he's an absolute, watt monster, fantastic racer. And so knowing that he was suffering on this course made me feel better about my suffering, because I know I was pushing as hard as I can. I know I did my best. And truly, this was probably one of the best races I've ever had. So I will link the link to the live, because this was one of the races that I raced live. And so I'll link to that just so, for those of you guys who want to check out the full thing. But again, I'll also link to Rough Drafts, because again, he did a fantastic job. And it really was a hard race. It's a hard course. The gravel or the cobblestones are deceptively hard, because you feel like you can just roll right through them. They feel fast, but ultimately they are very hard. And so there's 2 riders that I would highly recommend you keeping an eye on, and that's S Ward and H Wound. So Ward and Wound, S Ward and H Wound are probably the 2 strongest riders in this course. Now we've got Mike Bell in this course as well, and he ended up, fantastic racer. He ended up, this is his second race back-to-back that he did, decided to jump in there with me. I was truly appreciative that he jumped in there, especially since he had already done this race, and he did a climb portal prior to his race. And so this was just the cherry to the cherry on top for him. And so I definitely, always appreciate, people that I know jumping into races, because I like to do the same thing when I can, and it just, builds that community. And so as we start to, push through here, you can see that we're kind of going at a pretty moderate pace, but that did not last very long. And so I'm going to jump forward to that. And so as you can see, you have a rider going off the front, C. Shaw. You got S. Ward coming in behind him. You got H. Wound coming in behind him. And that move right there completely split apart this race. It really set everything apart. And I knew that I had to make this break, because if not, I knew I was going to end up, not being able to keep up. And so my goal is always to kind of stay with this front group as long as possible. And as I hit the cobblestones here, I, push as hard as I can, almost sprint level kind of push in order to catch up to the front group. Now, ultimately, this group does end up getting caught, but you'll see as I jump forward again that this really became the move that caused, you know, a massive split in this group. And we're not even out of the, you know, what would be considered the neutralized section. Like, this is still the lead in for the race, and we're already, you know, I'm already at my limits in terms of, you know, how this course felt. And so, like I said, I'm going to jump forward again to, you know, where the race action picks up. And so as we start to approach yet another sprint section, you can see the group is split up. There's, you know, a handful off the back. And, you know, right now the group is about 11 riders. You see Fett going off the front. And again, you know, it's these little surges that really, you know, made this a hard race, beyond the cobblestones. Now, thankfully, you know, people didn't surge as hard as they could have in order to bring Fett back. It was just kind of, you know, one or two people off the front that pushed up the watts. You see a couple orange numbers on the right-hand side, but nothing that really, you know, really made it to where we had to all sprint. You see, you know, there's a couple more people kind of bridging that gap, people using their power-ups in order to kind of make the cobblestones a little bit easier with the bulldozer or steamroller, rather, power-up. And, you know, so as we cross the line there, again, you know, the good thing about at this point of the race, no one really tried to, you know, make these hard sprints in order to bridge up to those front riders. We just kind of let it happen naturally, but we are still going pretty fast. We're going 46 kilometers an hour on cobblestones and only, you know, and picking up the pace. And, you know, again, Rough Draft said it best on his channel that it seemed insane to be going incredibly fast coming out of these cobblestones the way we did. And so, again, I'm going to jump forward to the end of this one so you can see how we finish this up. And so as we get to the 1.8 kilometer, you see Dr. Up Cyclist from BMTR, which I got to say, I love their new kit. It is fantastic. Man, you know, tells everybody good luck. It's been fun, which it really, I can't say that it was fun. It hurt. It was tough. And at this point, I am ready for the race to be over. There were many points in the race where I honestly thought I was just going to stop because I really did not feel like I was going to hold on. And so mentally, it took a lot for me to even just get to this point. And so as we start to come into this final cobblestone section, which leads into what truly is my favorite sprint segment, which is a 750 meter sprint segment on this course. I'm probably not going to ever be able to pronounce the name of it. But I will just say it is the longest sprint segment. It is the best sprint segment in my opinion because it's the longest. And so you can see the pace slowly starting to pick up and people are really anticipating that, you know, that final, you know, few hundred meters. And ultimately the way that I would recommend approaching the sprint, because it has, you know, it's kind of platformed where it has a couple risers, is you want to make sure that you don't go too early unless you have the power to go over those risers with enough efficiency that it's going to leave you enough energy to get to that last segment, because those last 100-ish meters are uphill. And even though it's not a, you know, it's not a hard climb, it's 200 and, you know, or it's 3% somewhere around there. I think it does kick up towards the end maybe. But it's not a hard climb. It's just long enough to really zap the power. So you can see someone launches their steamroller power up and the pace, and at that point the pace is on. You know, people are in the sprint. They are pushing as hard as they can. You know, I push my watts up to about, you know, mid 500s just to kind of hold on to the wheel. I'm not looking to push through the group just yet, because I know that if I can stay on the back of this group, then I can at least, you know, try and sprint through them for this final sprint. But the pace just keeps pushing on, and so I end up falling to the back here as we round the corner and start to hit the final uphill portion of this sprint. I start to push as hard as I can, get up to 800, you know, almost 900 watts here, and just trying to get to the back of the wheel of the next rider so that way I can kind of push through. But ultimately my quads were done, absolutely done. And so I crossed the line in 7th place, which again, I was absolutely happy about, because this was an absolutely terrible race. It hurt so much. It truly was again, it's a course that I completely underestimated. Looking at the terrain, looking at the fact that it's a fairly flat course, there's not much elevation that you're going to get on this course, but those cobblestones, man, it's like going into the wind the whole way. As you can see, Zwift added some new graphics there. So I got a number 7 on my rear end, showing that I crossed the line in 7th place. And there goes Mr. McRob. Came across, I think, in 9th it showed. And so pretty cool that they do that. And so hope you enjoyed. So I did end up doing another race with the Dirty Watts team on a series that they put on. But ultimately, it was, again, another live race that I did. And so I wasn't able to download it from YouTube. But what I will tell you is go check it out. If you're into climbing, it was on the 4 Horsemen course. And boy, oh boy, was that a brutal race. It ultimately ended up only being a few of us that did it, but it was just enough to push. And then after the race was finished, I ended up going up the radio tower and setting a new PR. And so go ahead and check that out. Again, I appreciate you guys, and I will catch you on the next race. Hey guys, it's Miguel from That Thing You Just Watched. Hope you enjoyed that video, whether it was topic on nutrition or racing or a combination of both. Feel free to come back. I will continue to put out videos like this and continue to showcase what you can do with smart nutritional strategies, combining that with racing, because that is what this channel is all about. And feel free to check in if you want to see more racing. Click on wherever the link's at, subscribe, and I will catch you guys on the next race.